Bleach is filled to the brim with interesting and powerful groups and factions. However, if I had to pick one as a favorite, it's without a doubt the Gote 13. Ever since their first introduction in Chapter 81, I've always been captivated by them. Their differing personalities and goals, the fact they aren't necessarily friends or even allies, and each one's unique design. Though, what I love the most is how they were portrayed as this insurmountable hurdle that Ichigo had to overcome. Each captain seemingly on a different plane altogether. Kubo does an amazing job at getting the point of their strength across to the reader, through exposition, narration, visual storytelling, and most importantly, their fights. Captains, like I mentioned earlier, are not exactly what one would consider allies, and have fought each other on several occasions. Today, I wanted to compare two of my all-time favorite captains and give my thoughts on how a fight would go between them. Those two captains being Gin Ichimaru of Squad 3 and Byakuya Kuchiki of Squad 6. Now, since Gin isn't in the series as long as Byakuya, I will have Gin go up against Byakuya at different points in the series, starting with Soul Society and ending with Thousand Year Blood War. So, without further delay, let's dig into these two individually. I am a snake. My skin is cold. I have no heart. I slither looking for prey with the tip of my tongue. I swallow the people I care whole. That's the kind of creature I am. These words spoken by Gin seemingly perfectly encapsulated his character. A snake in the grass waiting to strike its prey. Though there is more to his character than that, it is exactly how he prefers to fight. Seeing as Gin dies in chapter 417, we have less to go over for him, so that's where we'll start. However, don't let his shorter runtime in the series completely influence your decision. Gin has some extraordinary feats in the series that I'll go over here. Much like any other Shinigami, Gin has a Zanpakuto, his being Shinso, with the ability to seemingly stretch an incredible distance in a near instant. It's the first Shikai from a captain that we see in the series, shown to us in chapter 74 when Gin uses it to cut Jidambo's arm off so quickly Ichigo nor Uryu even knew what happened at the moment, and again in chapter 75 when he uses it to push Ichigo and Jidambo back to the other side of the gate. Yoruichi goes on to think of him as someone of a higher caliber, noting that Ichigo is nowhere near a match for Gin and wants to avoid fighting him at all costs. Later on, we see Gin fighting the captain of Squad 10, Toshiro Hitsugaya, in chapter 132, where he employs those snake-like tactics, using his Hiyori to cloak his Zanpakuto, then activating Shinso underneath to sneak attack Toshiro, nearly killing him. Even after Toshiro dodges the strike, Gin points out that dodging might not have been the best course of action, as his shot was also lined up with Hinamori, and would have killed her had Matsumoto not jumped in to block it. Gin appears unbothered by these events, even after having his arm frozen by Toshiro. It should be noted that Toshiro himself, much like Gin, is a prodigy, being the youngest captain in the Soul Society's history, having enough power to change and manipulate the weather with his Zanpakuto Hiyorimaru, the same Toshiro who had no problem disposing of Espada 11 Xiaolong Kufang once the Gentai Kaijo was released. While Toshiro was in his Bankai, it would be noted that the multipliers are similar. Bankai is a 5 to 10 multiplier, and it's stated that after the Gentai Kaijo is released, a Shinigami's power is quintupled. Given that Toshiro was in his immature Bankai state, I'd argue his Bankai was only about a 5 times amp, while Gin in his base is comparable to Tozen, who blitzes and cuts off Grimmjow's arm in his base. All this to say, I think base Gin is likely stronger than a premature Bankai Toshiro. We don't get another fight out of Gin for a while. However, his next big fight is in chapters 398 to 404 against Ichigo and Fate Karakura. This Ichigo is the same one who got a multitude of amps in Hueco Mundo. The same one who is putting up a fight against Grimmjow, going as far as to casually catch his strike without looking, and Espada 4 Ukiura, arguably the strongest of the 10 Espada. This is also the fight where we see Gin's Bankai, Kamishini no Yari. or God-killing spear. According to Gin, his Bankai stretches 8 miles. He then proceeds to cut a significant portion of Fate Karakura in half, though there is reason to believe that Gin is lying about his Bankai that we'll get into in a bit. While using his Bankai's Bunto Rinjin ability, Gin is able to force Bankai Ichigo to use his new Hollow Mask to evade the attack, and then immediately after, we see that Gin forced him right out of it, calling his mask and Ichigo brittle. Keep in mind that in chapter 382, Unohana says Ichigo's spirit energy is comparable to hers. Ichigo reveals that his Shihakusho is tied to his power, and at this point he had less than half of it. This means Ichigo, with only half his spirit energy, is comparable to captains on the level of Unohana. So Gin is bodying an Ichigo with full Ryatsu and his new Hollow Mask on. During this fight, it is painfully clear that Ichigo is outclassed. Gin tells Ichigo that he isn't interested in him anymore, saying that he was scarier back in the Soul Society, asking if Ichigo was always this weak, all before telling Ichigo that he should just run away. The final, and by far most impressive feat that Gin displays is being able to deal a lethal blow to Aizen. In chapter 414, we see just how much Gin embodies that of a snake. After working with Aizen for decades, Aizen reveals to Gin the weakness of Kyokasui Getsu. One must touch Aizen's blade before complete hypnosis has been activated. Gin held on to this information and laid in waiting, like a snake in the grass, waiting to strike its prey. After touching Kyokasui Getsu's blade, Gin uses the same attack he used on Toshiro, striking with his Zanpakuto while it's hidden in his Haori. Gin then explains to Aizen that he lied to him about his true power, about Kamishini no Yari, saying it doesn't stretch as far or as fast as he said, that its true power is when it expands and contracts, it turns to dust and reassembles itself at the desired length. Should it pierce the target, it can leave a piece of itself within the target. Within the blade is a poison that dissolves the cells of the target. Truly, the ability of a snake. However, the ability of Kamishini no Yari isn't what makes this an impressive feat. It's the fact he was able to harm Aizen at all. Remember, a battle between Shinigami is a battle between Ryatsu. While in his base form, Aizen states he has double the Ryatsu of the average captain, he is shown completely negating Soifon's Negeki Kesatsu with his raw spirit energy, while Gin was able to pierce Aizen as he was in his post-chrysalis state. Keep in mind, while in his chrysalis, Aizen was capable of defeating Kisuke, Yoruichi, and Isshin simultaneously. Even if you want to make the argument Aizen was off guard, it doesn't really matter. In chapter 105, Kenpachi tells Ichigo the reason he couldn't cut him, even while letting Ichigo swing at him with everything he's got. It's because Ichigo's full strength was weaker than the spirit energy unconsciously leaking out of Kenpachi. So even if Aizen was off guard, it wouldn't have mattered. At this point, Aizen's Ryatsu was beyond the point it could be sensed by lower beings. So, while Gin has less fights than Byakuya, the feats he performs in the few bouts he has are epic in proportion. That about wraps up Gin. Now let's get into Byakuya. I have learned all too well that I am still far too weak to let myself grow headstrong. As I have been lucky enough to survive, I must strive once more to achieve strength enough to justify the pride I once held. Byakuya Kuchiki is the first captain we are introduced to in the series, way back in the Substitute Shinigami arc, and was it a damn good intro. A calm, collected, and cold character. After Ichigo begins to get a leg up on Renji, Byakuya steps in and completely dismantles Ichigo. Byakuya performs a technique called Senka, where the practitioner attacks the opponent twice, almost simultaneously, severing the Saketsu and Hakusui of the target. This is a favored move of Byakuya, and one that strips the user of their spiritual powers. The next time we see Byakuya fight is in chapters 140 to 144 against Renji. This is also the first time we see Byakuya's Shikai, Senbon Zakura, and his Bankai, Senbon Zakura Kageyoshi. The thing I really like about this fight is it's poetic and philosophical in nature. It's about Renji's resolve to overcome an insurmountable task, like the baboon trying to capture the moon's reflection in the water, only to sink to the bottom. Kubo does an amazing job at representing this in this fight, with Renji getting one strike on Byakuya, his fangs finally reach the moon. However, poetry aside, Renji was completely outmatched in this fight. Byakuya completely dismantles Renji with his Bankai as well as some Kido, using Hado 33 without an incantation, yet it's still powerful enough to create a blast that dwarfs the surrounding buildings. This fight shows us that Byakuya is truly a master at his craft. The next fight Byakuya partakes in is against Ichigo at the end of the Soul Society arc. Now, to be fair, Byakuya is getting dog-walked the majority of this fight. However, this is where we see a lot of Byakuya's repertoire. Senkei, which abandons Senbonzakura's defense for unrelenting offense, and Hakutaiken, which condenses the millions of blades into one sword of extreme potency. Even if Byakuya is losing the majority of the fight, he is squaring up against, and going relative to, Bankai Ichigo, the same Ichigo that had defeated Kenpachi Zaraki in the same arc while in his Shikai. This is another one of those poetic battles, with the main fight being between Ichigo and Byakuya's ideals, not just their swords. One could argue that Byakuya losing this fight made him stronger in the end, his power no longer beholden so strictly to the Soul Society's laws. In chapters 299 to 302, we get the face-off between Byakuya and Espada 7, Zamari. It is clear that Byakuya has gotten leagues stronger since his battle with Ichigo. He is calm and calculated, only ever showing emotion when Rukia is in danger. This fight once again displays the expanse of Byakuya's moveset, as well as his impeccable tact. He talks down to Zamari the entire fight while countering him at every turn. When hit with Zamari's Amor, an ability that lets him take control of whatever the symbol launched from his eyes touched, Byakuya cuts the muscles and tendons in his left arm and leg. Even after being severely handicapped, he is able to blitz Zamari, who himself said he had the fastest Sonido of all the Espada. Byakuya correctly deduces that Amor works similar to Kido after he subdues Rukia with Bakudo 61, Rikujakoro, after the body had been taken over by Amor. He then uses this information to block Amor with Bakudo 81 Danku, which blocks all Hado of 89 and lower. We also get to see a new Senbonzakura technique called Goke, which completely envelops the target in a sphere of blades before attacking from all angles simultaneously, leaving no room for escape. I believe this fight not only displays more of the epic power that Byakuya possesses, but lends credence to my theory that the changing of his ideals amped him in some way. After Zomari goes on this spiel asking what gives Shinigami the right to decide their fates, Byakuya tells him he did not kill Zomari as a Soul Reaper, or because of his loyalty to Soul Society, but because he attacked his pride. We see that Rukia is depicted in that moment, implying Rukia is the pride he speaks of, which is a total 180 from the Byakuya we saw in the Soul Society arc. Later on in the same arc, Byakuya casually slices off Yami's leg while he is in his release form. Yami says that Grimmjow and Ulquiorra are like trash compared to him, as he is the Cerro Espada. While it is true that Kenny and Byakuya are both fighting him, they were more focused on fighting with one another. Then later in chapter 422, we see Yami laying on the ground defeated in his second transformation. It's a short fight and Yami is off-screen, but it still shows exactly how powerful Byakuya has become. After the events of the Arrancar arc and the Deicide arc, we are introduced to the Fullbringers, a group of powerful humans with incredible power, one of them being Shukuro Tsukishima, the main antagonist of the arc, well, him and Ginjo. What makes this such an outrageous feat of power for Byakuya stems from Tsukishima's ability, Book of the End. Tsukishima is able to inject himself into the past of anyone his sword cuts. Anything he inserts into the past becomes a matter of fact, which includes Tsukishima defeating Aizen. Now, I understand how contentious that is, saying that Tsukishima is superior to an Aizen with the Hogyoku absorbed, and we can tell from the panel that is Butterfly Aizen before his final transformation, the same Aizen that required Dangai Ichigo to take down. However, I believe there are some things that support my theory, which I will go over briefly as an attempt to justify the scaling. Like I said earlier, Tsukishima can insert himself into someone or something's past, and whatever past he creates in this way becomes a fact. We see this in his fight with Byakuya when he inserts himself into the past of the terrain where they are fighting on, making it so he was there before to set up traps that appear in the present. And again, when he inserts himself into Byakuya's past, making it so Tsukishima was the one who taught Byakuya all his techniques, thus knowing everything about Byakuya. However, the ability goes far beyond this. When Ichigo has his Bankai broken by Yuha in their fight, not even Orihime can restore it, as it was destroyed across all possible futures, as confirmed by Rukia in chapter 681. However, Tsukishima says, if there is a past where that didn't happen, you should be able to reject it there. This implies that when he uses his ability, that it creates a new past. This plan works and Ichigo's Bankai is restored, along with Ichigo's powers that Yuha had absorbed. These feats, I think, prove that Tsukishima's ability indeed means that he created a past where he beat Aizen. It is a fact that he did so. With that out of the way, we can get back to what this means for Byakuya. Byakuya is capable of swinging with a Tsukishima who at this point has canonically beaten Butterfly Aizen. This actually makes sense considering Renji's statement to Jackie about having been training to beat someone like Aizen. Byakuya confirms he was training just as long as Renji in chapter 472. This would put him far above the Gin that was cut down by a weaker version of Aizen. Byakuya didn't just get stronger, but displayed his battle prowess in this fight. Tsukishima knew every ability that Byakuya had, and the weakness of Senbonzakura Kageyoshi. And on the fly, Byakuya freestyles a new technique, harming himself in the process and killing Tsukishima. Byakuya's fight with Asnot didn't do much, if anything at all, for his scaling. However, it can be used to show just how far he comes after training in the Soul Palace. In his rematch with Asnot in chapter 569, Asnot believes Byakuya is using his Bankai, but it is in fact just his Shikai. This implies that Byakuya has gotten so powerful from his Soul Palace training that his Shikai is comparable in power to his Bankai before the training, or at least has as many blades. Once again, this fight doesn't really do much for Byakuya in terms of building his raw power, but once again, his use of Senbonzakura is amplified. The final battle we see Byakuya take place in is against Gerard, one of Yuha's Schutzstaffel, and the heart of the Soul King. Per the running theme of the last few battles we have covered, Byakuya doesn't do anything that new or crazy. He is capable of harming Gerard after being harmed enough by Kenpachi to gain a substantial stat amp, but this is with the help of Toshiro and his completed Bankai. All in all, Byakuya over the course of the series has grown in power and skill, but also as a character, which that in and of itself has seemed to amp him greatly. Well, that about covers everything. Now, let's get into the battles. First off, we have Gin versus Soul Society arc Byakuya. So there are two ways you can look at this fight. In Bleach Databook 1 Souls, we get the official stats for each captain. It goes over stats like offense, defense, mobility, Kido, intelligence, and physical strength. Gin has an 80 in all stats, while Byakuya has 90s in offense, mobility, Kido, and intelligence, an 80 in defense, and a 70 in physical strength. This gives Byakuya an overall of 510, and Gin an overall of 480. While this difference isn't that large, it's still a gap nonetheless. With that said, Toshiro is ranked with an overall of 500 and has a 90 in mobility, same as Byakuya. I see some people say these stats are meant to represent potential and not be used for comparison, though that seems odd to me, and I haven't been able to find where that was stated. This is where we can take two different perspectives on this fight. If we assume the stats can be compared, then a heavily injured Byakuya who just fought and lost to Ichigo, being able to blitz over to Rukia to take the hit for her when Gin attempted to kill her with Shinso, goes hand in hand with him having the superior speed stat. But Gin was able to pretty casually deal with an enraged Toshiro that was trying to kill him. A Toshiro that has the same mobility stat as Byakuya, showing that Gin is more than capable of handling targets faster than him. While Toshiro has a lower offensive stat than Byakuya, his being an 80 and Byakuya's being a 90, Toshiro is equal to Gin in physical strength. Gin being rather sneaky and unpredictable in combat may allow him to make up for the small difference in offensive power. This interpretation makes this fight a lot closer, with Gin coming out on top in a high diff fight in my opinion. But it honestly could go either way. However, if we assume these stats are not meant to be compared and represents the potential of the captain in question, then honestly, this is a pretty clean wash for Gin. Given that we don't have any confirmation of Gin doing any training after leaving the Soul Society with Aizen and Tozen, it's fair to assume he has always been this powerful since his first appearance in the series. While it is true that playing the distance game against Byakuya is typically a disadvantageous strategy, as revealed by Tsukishima, Gin is uniquely equipped to not suffer from this downside. Since Shinso turns to dust then materializes at the desired length, Gin doesn't really have to worry about it being blocked by Senbon Zakura Kageyoshi. By the time Byakuya realizes the sword is there, if he can realize it at all, it would be well within his safe zone, and by then it would be too late. Even techniques like Senkei and Gokei are useless. Gin is far too fast to be tagged or entrapped by either technique, and Hakutaiken, while powerful, simply isn't scaling to Gin at this time. Gin takes this fight low diff, if we go with this interpretation. Gin versus Arankarok Byakuya, things get a lot closer here. Byakuya smokes Zamari so easily, it's not even funny. The only time he was pressed is when Zamari targeted Rukia. If Zamari's statement about being the fastest Sonido is to be believed, then this means Byakuya has become significantly faster. On top of that, we see more use of his Kido prowess. To further cement his power, he is casually cutting the leg off of Yami while he is in his release form. Yami tells us that Grimmjow and Ukiura are trash compared to him, and this is after Ichigo fought Segunde Atapa Ukiura, whose spiritual pressure was felt throughout all of Las Noches. If you want to say he was referring only to first release Ukiura, then that still puts him in an insane league of power. That and the fact he is the Cerro Espada. Now, Espada ranks are based off of lethality, not necessarily power or strength, but still, his rank is worth considering here. However, with all that being said, I still think Gin is taking this fight. Yes, it's true that Byakuya has gotten significantly stronger, but just not near the level of Gin. Like I said earlier, Ichigo with half of his Ryatsu was stated by Unohana to have the same amount of spirit energy as her. This was stated before Ichigo had his brief exchange with Yami, where he is capable of damaging him, and as I also stated before, you need comparable Ryatsu to harm your opponent. This same Ichigo has his Ryatsu fully restored, and Gin beats him even when he uses his new mask. While I believe the fight is definitely closer, Gin just has better feats. Byakuya should be fast enough to avoid Shinso, so Gin will have to go Bankai, but that is where he loses. Kamishini no Yari's speed was pressing this fully restored Ichigo. I believe Byakuya could avoid some of the attacks, but it would only take one good hit for Byakuya to end up dead. If Gin can't kill him with regular attacks, then the poison within his blades certainly will. That being said, I don't think Gin comes out of this battle unscathed, so I'd say he takes it mid to high diff. Now, the Lost Agent arc Byakuya is where the tides of battle shift in Byakuya's favor. After training for 17 months, Byakuya has become ridiculously strong. We know by Renji's statements they were training to beat Aizen or a foe of similar power, and given what I went over earlier with how Book of the End seemingly boosts Tsukishima up several tiers of power to that of Butterfly Aizen, then I'd say this much of an increase makes sense. Gin was cut down by post-Chrysalis Aizen. who should be far below the Aizen that Byakuya would scale to. I do believe that Gin could possibly get in a lucky hit with Kamishini no Yari and destroy Byakuya's cells, but the chances of that happening are slim to none. Byakuya wins this fight low to mid diff. Finally, we have come full circle. Gin may stomp Soul Society arc Byakuya, but the opposite is true for Thousand Year Blood War Byakuya. This is a Byakuya who has trained with the Zero Squad in the Soul Palace. After this training, his Shikai is indistinguishable from his prior Bankai. It could be interpreted that this means his Shikai has as many blades as his old Bankai, but I think it's more than that. It seems that everyone else who trained in the Soul Palace gained a boost in stats, with it being stated Ichigo has reclaimed the power he had in his final battle with Aizen, while in his Shikai. This means we can draw a one-to-one comparison between the two. On top of that, sensing Ryatsu is a basic technique that even the most fodder of spiritually aware beings can do. Plus, I doubt Asnot counted the individual blades. This leads me to believe that Asnot thought this was Byakuya's Bankai because of his Ryatsu, not because of the amount of blades. If this is the case, then a Shikai Byakuya is equal to the Byakuya that fought Tsukishima in the Lost Agent arc. I don't even really need to get into the Gerard fight at this point. Byakuya wins this fight no diff. Byakuya at this point could probably negate Kamishini no Yari with his Ryatsu alone. In conclusion, I believe that Gin versus Byakuya is a pretty fun fight. Scaling aside, their characters clash with one another. Byakuya tells Tsukishima himself that he despises the way Tsukishima fights. It's underhanded and manipulative, which are definitely traits of Gin, both in and out of battle. I doubt there would be a lot of philosophical discussion between the two, but through their fight, they would understand one another, even if they disagree. But with that said, Gin starting as such a powerful foe and the insane jumps in power Byakuya gets later in the series, combined with the fact that Byakuya's fights are spread vastly apart from one another, leaves this topic full of one-sided fights. I'd say Gin versus Byakuya in the Soul Society arc, if you go with the interpretation that the databook stats can be compared, is the closest and most interesting of the fights, with no real clear winner. However, if you don't think the stats are applicable, then I'd say Gin versus a Ronkar arc Byakuya is the closest, but still has a pretty clear victor. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. It was really fun to write and record. Gin and Byakuya are two of my favorite captains, so any excuse to talk about them, I'll take. Don't forget to give this video a like, click subscribe, and ring that bell button for updates. And if you have any thoughts on this topic, have ideas on what topic I should cover next, or just want to say hi, leave a comment below, and thank you for watching.